The release of Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare rocketed Infinity Ward into the limelight, transforming what was, despite prior successes with Call of Duty in its first sequel, still a relatively small and unknown developer into a dominant force. This success spawned 2 direct sequels in 2009 and 2011. Call of Duty 4 was grounded in realism. The story, while bombastic at times, didn't push the player beyond their willingness to suspend disbelief. Modern Warfare 2 took this foundation, climbed aboard a snowmobile and jumped the shark, or a snowy ravine in this case. Went from what could have been a dramatisation of real-world events to a Bond movie. A one-man mission to save the world. And it was great. The third instalment took this even further, wrapping up the overarching story of the previous 2 games in the most over-the-top fashion possible. It was utterly bonkers. If Modern Warfare 2 jumped the shark, then 3 launched it into space. This wrapped up the trilogy, finishing the story and leaving scope for Infinity Ward to work on something new for their next instalment of the franchise.
Shoot the mines!
The staff at Infinity Ward were encouraged to pitch ideas for the new game, anything from setting to story and characters or plot. Nothing was off the table. Early ideas saw the game as being Modern Warfare 4, set in the present day, with the events taking place in a world similar to what they know, with far future settings and space combat being thrown out as options early on. With the Modern Warfare trilogy being all tied up, however, and seeing an opportunity to tell a new story, Infinity Ward made the decision to move away from this too. During the idea pitching process, someone had suggested a post-apocalyptic scenario. This led to what would become the premise of the next game from Infinity Ward, Call of Duty Ghosts. All of the main Call of Duty games up to this point had been on 7th console generation hardware. 2012 was the beginning of the 8th generation, however. The Wii U had released and the Xbox One and PlayStation 4 were right around the corner, and Activision wanted to capitalise on it. As such, it became a cross-generation title, with versions released for pretty much everything that was on the market at the point of release, meaning that 6 versions of the game had to be developed simultaneously. Activision gave Infinity Ward the option to develop whichever of the versions that they wanted, offering to have the other given to another developer, with a Wii U port being given to Treyarch to complete. It was immediately decided that both the current and next-gen versions would be developed in-house by Infinity Ward, with support from Neversoft and Raven, 2 other Activision-owned studios that frequently support on Call of Duty games, even today. This was an enormous undertaking. The Xbox 360 and PS3 were significantly less powerful than their upcoming replacements, and vastly different on both an architectural and OS level. On top of that, they were using a new version of the engine on a completely new game that had no real connection to the previous titles that may have allowed for reused assets. In previous games, assets were often shared between the 3 versions, Xbox 360, PS3 and PC, with similar levels of quality between them all. This time around, a high-quality PC asset was produced, then a next-gen quality, and then finally a current-gen asset, each tripling the workload for basically everything. A substantial amount of effort was put into optimising the game to work well on all platforms, with as much parity between them as possible, at least on a generational level. Some cuts had to be made for the current-gen versions, texture and screen resolution were lower, 880 by 720 on 360, PS3 and Wii U, leading to a far softer image. Multiplayer had its match player count reduced from 12 to 8 in most modes, with some like Ground War being eliminated entirely on the older machines due to performance concerns. The next-gen versions faced their own issues. The PS4 version ran at a native 1080p, but only after a day 1 patch, whereas the Xbox One release was stuck at 720p permanently due to it not being able to maintain the 60 frames per second that was being targeted on all platforms. Call of Duty Ghosts was revealed to the world on the 21st of May 2013, during a special event held by Microsoft to reveal their new console, the Xbox One. In hindsight, this probably wasn't the best time to introduce the new game to the world. The Xbox One reveal showcase has been infamous for announcing bad decision after bad decision that the Xbox One never really recovered from. Still, comments on the reveal trailer were generally positive, and optimistic that this could be one of, if not the best one yet, thanks to a well-crafted trailer. The trailer showed off the new, modern, pseudo-post-apocalyptic setting, introducing the ghosts and hinting at the locales the player could travel to, culminating with a release date reveal, November 5th, 2013. Mechanically, Call of Duty Ghosts is perfect. It follows the same form as those previous titles in the series. Game feel is largely the same, and will instantly feel familiar to anyone who's played previous Infinity War games, or any games in the franchise for that matter. You point your weapon at whatever thing is angry with you and pull the trigger, and that thing can be relied upon to fall down. It runs smoothly at the targeted 60 frames per second, mostly anyway. The 7th gen version suffered with some drops, most notably on the Wii U version, but typically it ran pretty well across all platforms. But the next gen or PC versions were the places to play for the best experience. Gameplay doesn't divert from the standard set by Call of Duty 4 all too much. A few attempts at introducing new concepts are made, but ultimately these are typically one-shot wonders and are introduced and tutorialised, used for one level then never looked at again. It's something that series has always seemed to struggle with, making its new ideas relevant to the wider game rather than a single set piece or level. The one exception to this is the addition of a dog to the player's arsenal, Riley, a weaponised German Shepherd companion that is used a couple of times throughout the story, and rather than just being an overcomplicated gun, actually has a few sections of direct control. With that said, Riley only features in a couple of missions as a playable character, mostly for stealth sections and only a short amount of time in each. It feels like a missed opportunity that could have been used for something a little bigger. Later in the campaign is a level with a full vehicle section, not an on-rails turret section like that which crop up in the previous games from time to time, but a fully player-controlled opportunity to pilot a tank, a rather large level with multiple objectives to be met. It's clearly a nod to the Battlefield series that had been Call of Duty's main competitor for a while now, though not quite on the same scale. It's a nice change of pace, even if it does play in a way that isn't drastically dissimilar to the main meat of the campaign. You destroy the tanks, take down helicopters, and destroy some buildings. It's not overly complicated, but doesn't stick around long enough for it to outstay its welcome. This section contains spoilers for the plot, so if that's something you're worried about, skip ahead to the next section. The timecode will be in the description. The plot of Call of Duty Ghosts takes place across the United States and various locations in South America. However, the opening mission takes place in space, high above the Earth on board Odin, a US-owned superweapon, which is essentially a city-killing space railgun. Odin is attacked by a group of then-unknown antagonists, hell-bent on taking control of the weapon. Before this can be accomplished though, Odin is fired on the United States, devastating the ground below before it and everyone on board burns up while re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. Meanwhile on Earth, Elias Walker is telling a story to his two sons, Logan and Hesh, about the mysterious Ghost Unit and the legend of how they form. It's an effective opening scene that I honestly really like. It isn't particularly subtle, but Infinity Ward had abandoned subtlety a long time ago. Space hadn't really been explored by Call of Duty at this point, so opening the game with a completely new setting was pretty refreshing. It was still a linear progression through the level, but the lack of gravity in space allowed for more vertical movement than typically found. It's something that Activision was apparently quite fond of, as the next couple of games in the series all started to move progressively further towards the future, opening up more verticality and movement options, culminating in the divisive Infinite Warfare in 2016, being a full-on interstellar space romp. It transpires that the destruction of Odin was triggered by the Federation of the Americas, a somewhat unbelievable military union of all the nations within South America. Immediately following this, they somehow managed to arrange and subsequently invade the United States. Fast forward 10 years from the explosive opening, and Logan and Hesh are part of a US unit commanded by their father. While patrolling in ruins of what was California, they discover that the former commander of the Ghosts, Gabriel Rourke, who was previously missing in action and presumed dead, was working with the Federation. While leaving the area, Logan and Hesh are ambushed by the Ghost unit and briefly join them to attempt to rescue their teammate. After a successful rescue, the Ghosts disappear. Shortly after this, the US army base they're stationed at is attacked by the Federation. Logan and Hesh are rescued at the last minute by the Ghosts, their commander revealing that he was their father Elias all along, and that they're now part of the unit. This all happens at Call of Duty's typical breakneck pace. It's explained through the medium of flashback how Rourke came to be missing and presumed dead. This is the first mission since the opening that stands out anyway. It takes place in Caracas and sees Rourke, Elias and the rest of the Ghosts tasked with tracking down and assassinating General Almagro, the leader of the Federation, while the US military executes a surprise attack on the city. While advancing through the city, Almagro destroys a dam on the outskirts in an attempt to halt the US advance, flooding the city. Single-minded, Rourke continues to pursue Almagro throughout the collapsing city, eventually confronting him aboard his chopper while he's attempting to flee the area. The general is killed, but the helicopter is conveniently shot down at the same time, crashing into the city. In saving the rest of his unit, Elias lets Rourke fall to his death. The rest of the backstory and how he turned into the primary antagonist is explained in a sentence on a loading screen, highlighting how thoroughly important it is. This is one of the most interesting missions mechanically. Despite being a fairly linear point A to B sightseeing tour, the flooded sections of the city can be used in combat to the player's advantage. There's a couple of situations where ducking underwater allowed the player to sneak up on enemies, getting the drop on them. It's a nice touch that I didn't expect from Call of Duty at the time. Unfortunately, from this point, most of the campaign feels a lot like filler to me. The plot continues to barrel along from mission to mission, often seeming like the cool set piece for that section was thought at first, then working backwards from that with the story. A vehicle section that is eerily reminiscent of a cut mission from Call of Duty 4 springs to mind as well, as a stealthy run through the jungle that feels like a missed opportunity to be something more than just avoiding guards' line of sight and holding forward. The next mission that actually manages to stand out is Clockwork, the 10th mission of the campaign, that sees the Ghosts infiltrating a Federation base in the Andes. It does a good job of building up tension early on, surrounded by enemies who are completely oblivious to your true identity. As far as I can tell, there are no instant failure states of being discovered at any point either, so if you mess up or just decide to go in guns blazing, it feels organic and far less scripted than it otherwise might. The escape from the facility is done in a similar way as well, in that the ghost unit attempts to blend back in and leave undetected. This works to a point, but the mission culminates with a car chase over a frozen lake. Clockwork feels to me like Ghost's equivalent of All Gilded Up from Call of Duty 4, in the sense that it's actually well paced for the most part, escalates naturally, and gives the player some options on how to tackle the various scenarios, something that the series should do more of. A couple of missions later, the water theme returns with Into the Deep, taking place entirely at sea in scuba gear. It plays in a similar way to the space sections at the start of the game, giving the player almost total free movement. It has some nice ideas, water affects the range of weapons and the local wildlife, namely sharks make an appearance and have to be dealt with. Unfortunately though, it's a very linear level that sees the player mostly just following an NPC and being told what to do. It's a nice idea, it just doesn't feel like it's making the most of the unique environment, something I feel that could be said about a lot of Ghosts. By this point, there isn't a huge amount of game left, and it's run out of interesting things to show off for the most part. There's a pretty terrible mission involving escorting an injured Riley to the end, the player not being able to do anything while carrying him, the tank level I mentioned earlier, and we revisit space for a much larger battle on a station, similar to the opening of the game. The game ends rather predictably on a showdown with Rourke that mostly takes place in a cutscene, with only the final shot being delivered by the player. Rourke somehow survives getting shot and drags the wounded Logan away, with the screen fading to black. A post-credit scene shows his fate, presumably the same treatment that turned Rourke in the first place. It was unexpected and clearly setting up a sequel that as of yet hasn't come. The reception to Ghosts at launch was a mixed bag, receiving middling review scores across the board. Generally, criticism was aimed at the campaign, with many outlets pointing out that it felt like a rehash of previous titles, just with a prettier coat of paint, and that it was starting to stagnate as a series. It wasn't the drastic departure and rebirth that many had hoped. Reviews seemed to echo the thoughts of players, with many feeling that it wasn't the step forward that it should have been. It probably didn't help that it followed Black Ops 2, which is still regarded by many to be the high point of the series. I can't say that I disagree with any of these points either. While I enjoyed the campaign, and definitely don't think it was bad by any means, it certainly wasn't treading any new ground, and didn't really stand out beyond a few key moments. Call of Duty's multiplayer had, up until Ghosts, been reliably decent. The previous entry, Black Ops 2, set a new high bar the previous year, and Ghosts was largely the same. Except where it wasn't. Tokens were still used to unlock new weapons and equipment, and were earned at a reasonable rate so as not to make it feel tedious to unlock new gear. The map design wasn't great, and the number of popular game types were removed like Demolition, Sabotage, and Headquarters. Microtransactions found their way into the game, and not only for cosmetics either. A couple of weapons with objectively better stats made their way into the game, leading to the game getting branded as pay to win by many. While this wasn't a 100% fair statement, it did definitely affect the game's balance somewhat. I don't really remember much of how the multiplayer felt in 2013, but I do remember not playing much of it. Replaying it today though, it didn't feel great. Matches were frequently on the leggy side of things, and everything felt a little sluggish. Hit detection and feedback, something Call of Duty has typically always done really well, is almost non-existent. It isn't a super good experience. The player base is all but gone now, not unusual for a 10-year-old game with an annual release, probably more so than normal. On Xbox One I found an average of 1 to 200 players at any one time, and even less on PC. Which is probably for the best actually. Many of the old Call of Duty games are vulnerable to RCE exploits, potentially putting your computer at risk, and as far as I'm aware, this has never been patched, so try the online on PC at your own risk. Being an Infinity Ward game, Ghost does not feature the infamous Zombies game mode, this being exclusive to Treyarch games. It does however have Extinction mode, a similar formula to Zombies, pitting a team of 4 against cryptids, ancient creatures that have overrun the area and need to be dealt with. Money is earned by completing various tasks, killing cryptids, destroying their hives, or searching through search piles. This money is used to buy new weaponry, equipment and ammo. It'll feel immediately familiar to anyone who's played Zombies before, or even something like Valve's Left 4 Dead series. It's not an unplayable experience by any means. A decent progression system is included that mirrors that of the regular multiplayer, with new perks and abilities to unlock, giving it some replay value. With a group of friends, it could still be pretty fun today. So does Ghost deserve the reputation of being one of the worst games in the franchise? It's difficult to say, and will likely depend on where your priorities lie. The campaign, while nothing new is enjoyable enough, it's got some memorable, unique, at least at the time, set pieces, and it tries to do something interesting or new in a few places. But on the other hand, it really does feel like a greatest hits compilation of the series' prior games that feels to be greater than, or even equal to the sum of its parts. The multiplayer isn't worth going back to, but it does have a tiny player base on consoles, it just doesn't feel particularly good to play, and pretty much all of the later installments surpass it in every way. Extinction is perhaps worth a look for an evening if you've got a couple of friends that own the game and are intrigued enough to waste a few hours checking it out, but don't go out of your way to buy the game for it. Selling somewhere in the region of 29 million units, which actually makes it one of the best-selling COD games ever, comfortably beating titles like the first two Modern Warfare games, making it a massive commercial success if nothing else. Ultimately, it didn't push any boundaries, other than maybe the player's patience for AAA mediocrity. It's by no means the worst in the franchise, but it's uncomfortably close. Thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed the video, please consider leaving it a like, and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. What are your thoughts on Call of Duty Ghosts? Is it the bottom of the list of Call of Duty titles for you, or did you really enjoy it? Let me know down in the comments.